138.9, no one on the suspect. 14856, clear. 14828, roger, on your next code
14-hour copy. There's a male screaming help, saying someone stabbed me. He is not giving a 20. This is a cell phone site location. Advise he's bleeding out. Medics are around code 3. Unit back.
1756.
365 Main, cross off Folsom and Harrison. However, that's a cell phone site. We're still waiting for an exact 20. He is outside on the street.
It was 2:35 a.m. on April 4th, 2023, when Bob Lee, the brilliant mind behind CashAPP, stumbled through the streets of downtown San Francisco, clutching his chest. Blood was seeping through his fingers. His heart, punctured by a kitchen knife, was failing him with every desperate step he took toward help. Just minutes earlier, he had been in a car with someone he thought he could trust, someone whose sister he considered a friend. But in those final moments, as Bob collapsed on the cold pavement and dialed 911 with his last breath, he realized that trust had cost him everything. This is the story of how a tech mogul worth millions was betrayed by the very people he tried to help, and how a dispute over family honor led to one of Silicon Valley's most shocking murders. How did a night of partying in San Francisco's elite tech circles end with a genius bleeding out on Main Street? Stay with me, because this story will shake you to your core. Bob Lee wasn't just another tech executive. He was a visionary who changed how the world moves money. As the founder of CashAPP and former chief technology officer at Square, Bob had revolutionized digital payments for millions of people worldwide. Born in 1979, Bob grew up in the Midwest with an insatiable curiosity for technology. While other kids played video games, Bob was coding his own. By his 20s, he had moved to Silicon Valley, where his programming genius caught the attention of industry leaders. Bob's breakthrough came at Square, where he helped build the infrastructure that would eventually power CashAPP, the peer-to-peer payment service that would make him a household name. Under his leadership, CashAPP grew from a startup idea to a platform processing billions in transactions annually. But Bob wasn't content with just one success. After leaving Square, he joined MobileCoin, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency company, as chief product officer. He was passionate about financial privacy and believed cryptocurrency could democratize access to wealth building. By 2023, Bob Lee was living the Silicon Valley dream. He had homes in multiple cities, drove luxury cars, and moved in circles with other tech elite. He was known for his generosity, always willing to help friends, invest in promising startups, or simply pick up the tab at expensive San Francisco restaurants. But here's where Bob's story takes a darker turn. His success and generous nature would ultimately put him in the crosshairs of someone who saw him as a threat to family honor. To understand how Bob Lee died, you need to understand the Momeni family, specifically Nima Momeni and his sister, Kazar. Nima Momeni was a 38-year-old tech consultant living in Emeryville, just across the bay from San Francisco. Unlike Bob's meteoric rise to fame, Nima operated in the shadows of Silicon Valley's success stories. He ran an IT consulting business called Expand IT, but he was far from the household name that Bob had become. Nima was fiercely protective of his sister, Kazar Momeni, who had married Dr. Dino Eliasnia, a prominent plastic surgeon. Kazar moved in San Francisco's wealthy social circles, attending exclusive parties and living a lifestyle funded by her husband's successful medical practice. But beneath the surface of Kazar's glamorous life was a world of drugs, affairs, and reckless behavior that would eventually collide with Bob Lee's trusting nature. Here's where the story gets complicated, and where Bob's generous spirit would become his downfall. Kazar had developed a relationship with Bob Lee through their mutual connections in San Francisco's party scene. They weren't lovers, as some would later claim, but they were friends who occasionally socialized together at the kind of high-end gatherings that defined Silicon Valley's after-hours culture. Bob, being the kind of person he was, tried to look out for Kazar when he noticed she was getting involved with dangerous people and situations. He genuinely cared about her well-being, not knowing that his concern would be misinterpreted as something far more sinister. But Momeni saw things differently. To him, any man showing interest in his sister's welfare was a potential threat, regardless of Bob's innocent intentions. In the days leading up to April 4th, 2023, tensions were building around Kazar's lifestyle and the people she was associating with. Bob Lee had become increasingly concerned about some of the individuals in Kazar's circle, particularly a drug dealer named Jeremy Boivin. According to court documents and witness testimony, Bob had confronted someone about giving Kazar drugs or allowing her to be in potentially dangerous situations. This wasn't Bob being controlling. This was Bob being the kind of friend who genuinely cared about someone's safety. But when word got back to Momeni about Bob's involvement in his sister's affairs, something shifted. Text messages recovered from the investigation would later reveal the growing tension. Nima had questioned Kazar about her relationship with Bob, and he didn't like what he was hearing. On April 3rd, the night before the murder, Kazar had been at a party at Jeremy Boivin's apartment. Bob was also there, along with several other people from their social circle. According to witnesses, something happened that night that upset Nima, though exactly what remains disputed. What we know for certain is that, by the early morning hours of April 4th, Momeni had decided to confront Bob Lee directly. But this wouldn't be a conversation between reasonable adults. This would be an ambush orchestrated by a man who felt his family's honor had been threatened. The stage was set for a tragedy that would shock Silicon Valley and beyond. April 4th, 2023, started as just another night in Bob Lee's busy social life. He spent the evening at an upscale apartment in the Millennium Tower, socializing with Kazar and her husband Dr. Eliasnia, along with other friends. Security footage from the building would later show Bob appearing relaxed and in good spirits. He had no idea that his life was about to end, or that someone was already planning his death. Around 12:30 a.m., Momeni arrived at the apartment. According to Kazar's later testimony, the interaction between Bob and Nima seemed normal at first. Bob even showed Nima pictures on his phone of a woman he was interested in dating. They talked about possibly going to a strip club, typical conversation for their social circle. But according to prosecutors' evidence, Nima had already made up his mind about what he was going to do to Bob Lee. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was premeditated murder disguised as a friendly encounter. Around 2 a.m., Nima suggested that he and Bob leave together. Security cameras captured them entering the elevator and leaving the building. Bob, trusting and unsuspecting, got into Nima's white BMW sedan. What Bob didn't know was that Nima had brought a weapon, a 4-inch kitchen knife that he would use to end Bob's life in just a matter of minutes. The BMW's GPS would later trace their route through San Francisco's empty streets toward the Rincon Hill area, where Main Street passes under the Bay Bridge. It's a secluded spot, perfect for what Nima had planned. As they drove through the night, Bob Lee had no idea he was riding to his execution. At approximately 2:35 a.m., Momeni stopped his BMW near Main Street and Harrison, in a dark, isolated area under the Bay Bridge. This wasn't a random location. It was chosen specifically because there would be few witnesses and minimal security camera coverage. What happened next, we know from the evidence presented at trial and Bob Lee's own desperate 911 call. According to prosecutors, Nima confronted Bob about his interactions with Kazar. The conversation quickly escalated, with Nima accusing Bob of inappropriate behavior toward his sister. Bob, confused and trying to de-escalate the situation, likely had no idea how serious Nima's accusations were or how dangerous the situation had become. But Nima wasn't interested in talking. He was there for revenge. In a matter of seconds, Nima pulled out the kitchen knife and attacked Bob Lee. The first stab wound hit Bob in the hip. As Bob tried to defend himself, Nima struck again, this time hitting Bob in the chest. The third and fatal blow punctured Bob's heart. Picture the horror of that moment. Bob Lee, a man who had spent his life building technologies to help people, was bleeding out in a desolate street corner, betrayed by someone he had no reason to fear. But here's what makes this story even more tragic. Bob didn't die immediately. With his heart punctured and blood filling his chest cavity, Bob Lee somehow found the strength to seek help. He stumbled through the streets of downtown San Francisco, leaving a trail of blood as he searched for anyone who could save his life. At 2:35 a.m., using his final reserves of strength, Bob dialed 911 from his cell phone. The 911 call that Bob Lee made in his final moments is one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in this entire case. When you listen to it, you hear a brilliant man, someone who had built one of the world's most successful payment platforms, reduced to desperately pleading for help as his life slipped away. "Help," Bob gasps into the phone, his voice weak and labored. "Someone stabbed me." The dispatcher, professional but clearly concerned, tries to get Bob's location. But Bob is disoriented, losing blood rapidly and struggling to stay conscious. He's stumbling through the streets, trying to get to where he thinks he can find help. "Are you still with the person who stabbed you?" the dispatcher asks. "No," Bob responds, and you can hear the pain and confusion in his voice. The call lasts for several agonizing minutes, with Bob trying to describe where he is while the dispatcher coordinates emergency response. But here's the crushing reality. Bob Lee was fighting a battle he couldn't win. The stab wound to his heart was fatal, and despite his incredible will to survive, he was already dying. Emergency responders arrived and transported Bob to San Francisco General Hospital, but it was too late. At 6:49 a.m., Bob Lee was pronounced dead. The tech visionary who had changed how millions of people think about money died alone in a hospital bed, the victim of a senseless act of violence. The irony is devastating. Bob Lee, who had spent years building systems to make people's lives easier and safer, couldn't protect himself from a friend's brother's misguided rage. When San Francisco police arrived at the scene, they found a crime scene that would lead them on a complex investigation involving Silicon Valley's elite social circles, family honor, and ultimately cold-blooded murder. The kitchen knife used in the attack was found near the scene, covered in Bob Lee's blood. Security footage from nearby buildings captured parts of Bob's final walk as he searched for help, providing investigators with crucial evidence about the timeline and Bob's condition after the attack. But the breakthrough came from digital evidence. Bob's phone contained text messages that revealed the tensions surrounding Momeni and the events leading up to the murder. More importantly, investigators were able to trace the route taken by Momeni's BMW using the car's GPS system and city surveillance cameras. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from herself. Hours after Bob's death, she sent him a text message, not knowing he was already dead, that read, "I know Nima came way ye down hard on you." This message would later be used by prosecutors to show that knew her brother had confronted Bob aggressively. The investigation also revealed that this wasn't a crime of passion or self-defense, as the defense would later claim. The evidence showed that Nima had brought the knife with him, had lured Bob to an isolated location, and had attacked him without provocation. On April 13, 2023, just 9 days after Bob Lee's murder, Momeni was arrested and charged with murder. The trial of Momeni became one of San Francisco's most watched court proceedings, drawing attention from across Silicon Valley and beyond. The prosecution, led by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, painted a picture of a calculated killer who had murdered Bob Lee out of misguided family honor. The defense team tried to argue that Nima had acted in self-defense, claiming that Bob had attacked first and that Nima had only defended himself. They portrayed Bob as an intoxicated aggressor, despite evidence showing Bob's blood alcohol content was not significantly elevated. Key witnesses included Momeni herself, who testified about the events leading up to her brother's confrontation with Bob. Her testimony revealed a lifestyle of drugs and partying that may have contributed to the tensions, but it also showed that Bob Lee had been genuinely trying to help her, not harm her. The trial lasted several months, with jurors hearing detailed testimony about the evidence, the relationships between the parties, and the events of that fatal night. Throughout it all, Bob Lee's family sat in the courtroom, seeking justice for a man they described as generous, loving, and completely innocent of any wrongdoing. On December 17, 2024, the jury reached their verdict. Momeni was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Bob Lee. While prosecutors had sought a first-degree murder conviction, the second-degree verdict still carries a potential sentence of 15 years to life in prison. The verdict brought some closure to Bob Lee's family and friends, but it couldn't bring back a brilliant mind whose life was cut short by senseless violence. The murder of Bob Lee sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley and beyond. Here was a man who had touched millions of lives through his technological innovations, killed by someone who barely knew him over a perceived slight that existed more in the killer's mind than in reality. Bob Lee's family has been devastated by their loss. His ex-wife and children have had to cope with not just the grief of losing someone they loved, but also the public nature of his death and the sensational details that emerged during the trial. The tech community rallied around Bob's memory, with former colleagues and friends sharing stories of his generosity, his brilliance, and his genuine care for others. Many pointed out the tragic irony that Bob died trying to help someone, the same generous spirit that had defined his entire career. CashAPP and MobileCoin, the companies Bob had helped build, continue to operate and serve millions of users worldwide. His technological legacy lives on in every transaction, every digital payment, and every person who benefits from the financial tools he helped create. But perhaps the most important lesson from Bob Lee's story is about the dangers of misplaced honor and toxic masculinity. Momeni killed Bob Lee not because Bob had actually done anything wrong, but because Nima's twisted sense of family honor convinced him that violence was an appropriate response to a perceived slight. The case also highlighted the dark underbelly of Silicon Valley's party culture, where drugs, alcohol, and reckless behavior exist alongside incredible wealth and innovation. Bob Lee wasn't perfect. He was human with all the complexities that brings. But he didn't deserve to die for trying to help a friend. As I researched this case, I kept coming back to one heartbreaking detail: Bob Lee's final 911 call. In those last moments of his life, as he stumbled through empty San Francisco streets with his heart literally broken, Bob Lee was still fighting to survive. He was still hoping that help would come, that he would see his children again, that this terrible night was just a nightmare he would wake up from. But Bob Lee didn't wake up from this nightmare. Instead, his death serves as a stark reminder of how quickly trust can be betrayed, how family honor can become family tragedy, and how the very generosity that makes someone beloved can also make them vulnerable. The tech industry has continued to evolve since Bob's death, but his influence remains. Every time you send money through CashAPP, you're using technology that Bob helped create. Every time you make a digital payment, you're benefiting from innovations he contributed to. His legacy lives on in the millions of people whose lives are made easier by his work. Momeni will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for a crime that accomplished nothing except destroying multiple families and robbing the world of a brilliant mind. Kazar Momeni must live with the knowledge that her lifestyle and the people she associated with led to an innocent man's death. And Bob Lee's family must somehow find a way to heal from a loss that never should have happened. This story isn't just about a murder in San Francisco. It's about trust, betrayal, and the terrible consequences when violence is seen as a solution to problems that should be solved with words. If this story affected you the way it affected me, I want you to take a moment to think about the Bob Lees in your own life, the people who are generous with their time, their money, and their care for others. These are the people who make our communities and our world better places to live. Don't wait until it's too late to tell them how much they mean to you. If you want to see more deep dives into true crime cases that reveal important truths about our society, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I spend weeks researching each case to bring you the full story, not just the headlines. In the comments below, share your thoughts about this case. What struck you most about Bob Lee's story? How do you think we can prevent tragedies like this in the future? I read every comment, and your perspectives help shape future videos. Next week, I'll be covering another case of trust betrayed. The story of a small-town banker who discovered her best friend was embezzling money to fund a secret gambling addiction. The lengths she went to protect her friend ultimately cost her everything, including her own freedom. Remember to like this video if it provided value to you, and share it with someone who appreciates well-researched true crime content. Your support helps me continue investigating these important stories. Until next time, stay safe and remember, the people closest to us aren't always the ones we can trust most.